Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Podcraft. This is the show all about podcasting, from launching your show to monetization and everything in between. I'm Colin Gray from thepodcasthost.com, joined by Matthew. How are you getting on, Matthew?
Good day, yeah. I don't know what to talk about, noisy clothing or boom arms. That seems to be the way to open up a
That's
podcast
the theme
episode.
of the last couple of months, yes.
Yeah. So I've got updates on neither.
Neither. Good. Okay, let's not get back into them then. That's good. You're not rustling right now, so I like it.
Well, I'm completely naked, so.
Right.
Good job. This is an audio podcast.
Nice picture for the listeners. So, on this episode, apart from Matthew's birthday suit, is we're going to look into a podcast media kit, aren't we? How to make a podcast media kit, how to do it, and what they can be used for as well, what they're useful for. So that'll be interesting to dig into that. And then podcast comments as well. So one of the big draws to YouTube, really, Matthew, isn't it? The fact that comments, community, you can have conversation with your audience on there. So we're going to dig into a few different ways you can do this in podcasting too, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to solicit comments, which again, I've always been funny about. I don't know that... I think it's a be careful what you wish for sometimes, but I'm the cynic. So,
yeah. Well, we'll get into it, but no, I mean, it's building community, isn't it? We want to build community. We want to hear from our listeners. How do you get more feedback? We hear that in the survey as well. Which survey was it again? It was our which one? Remind me, Matthew. We heard that people wanted more feedback from listeners.
Yeah, we've heard that on a few, like our big census or our podcasting problems survey.
Yeah.
Like this has come up a lot. So I'm semi jesting here. So there's good. I think 7 options we've got, maybe even more actually, to get into after we talk about media kits.
Yeah. So yeah, how to draw those comments as well, like how to actually encourage more people to give you feedback so that you can improve your show, so that you can get more content ideas, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, media kits and comments. Before we jump in, I'll mention this content is always supported by the products we make, one of which is our Podcraft Academy. So our Academy is our personal support space. We've got a whole range of courses and resources in there, but more importantly, on top of the learning, we've got action-taking tools as well. So you can use our 4-minute feedback to get feedback from me, Matthew, or somebody else in the team on anything related to your show. We've got our accountability tools to help you stay consistent. And we've got our support space as well, where you can just ask any questions, any problems that you have with your podcast right now and get some personal coaching. So that's over at thepodcasthost.com/academy. That's thepodcasthost.com/academy if you want to work with us to grow your show. All right, Matthew, media kits. Let's dig into, does everyone know what a media kit is? Or let's define it first. What's a brief definition of what a media kit actually is?
Yeah, if I'm thinking on the spot here, which is difficult for me, some sort of document or hub, I guess, that sums up what your podcast is, how it works, who it's for, like just all that information in one simple, hopefully easy to skim place. Would that be fairly accurate?
Yeah, definitely. It's exactly describing your podcast, isn't it? It's a place where somebody can go to learn more about your show, whether they want to write about it, whether they want to think about you as a guest on their show, whether they want to sponsor the show, probably more primarily. And it's kind of different from, it kind of gets mixed up with a press kit or a press release sometimes, doesn't it? Because it's more about the show as a whole as opposed to any particular news release, which is maybe more what a press release is it? The question we often get, isn't it, is like whether it's just for podcasters that want to monetize. Like, what do you use it for if it's not just to sponsor your show?
Yeah, like you've said, I guess this is the most common method, isn't it? It's trying to get sponsors or advertisers. It's a great way for them to see exactly what your show is and what it does. But you could use it for like some potential guests, journalists, collaborators, even listeners. Like if they want to check your show out, they could get a good overview using your media kit as well. You touched on press releases there, Colin. What would be like an example of like if Podcraft had a media kit versus if Podcraft did a press release? What would kind of be the difference there?
Well, the media kit's to describe the show as a whole, isn't it? And I think the difference between a media kit and just, a general description of your show is that it's really for people who are more interested in working with you in some way. So like you said, potential guests, like somebody that wants to come on the show, they want to have a look at your show, see what it's about, but they also want to get a bit of detail about the background. Like often you'll include numbers. So listener numbers, social media followings, downloads, all that kind of stuff. So often it's to give people a more kind of, maybe a business-minded background to your show. So not only like what your show's about, what topic you cover, but actually digging into target audience as well. So often you wouldn't have that on a normal description of your podcast, would you? Like who your target audience is. But in this, you'll say, well, actually our most common target audience is, people that are running a small business. It could be any gender, but it often tends to 40 to 60-year-olds, that kind of thing. So it's kind of digging into the more detail of that. So yeah, it's more around the actual, like the larger picture of what your show is, who it speaks to, what it aims to do, all that kind of stuff, as opposed to, press releases are just for a bit of news, essentially, like releasing something around, a current event maybe.
With media kits, Colin, do you think it's a much repeated piece of podcasting advice that you should have a media kit, and yet not a lot of podcasters actually create them? Because anecdotally, I'm sure a lot of podcasters don't have them. I could be totally wrong. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you're right. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's probably kind of a second stage of podcasting, really, isn't it? It's most commonly you'll make it when you are thinking about getting a sponsor. So it's most commonly goes out to sponsors, and so you'll put it together when there's some money on the line. Essentially, you've got a chance to get somebody to sponsor your show, and it's worth doing it because of the cash. But again, like you said, like it's so valuable actually to be able to send out to, a collaborator. You mentioned collaborators, like so somebody that can help you grow your show. So another show that you think is a similar kind of topic, similar kind of audience, maybe a similar kind of size in terms of listener numbers, to be able to send them a media kit that looks professional, polished, well put together, and say, look, here's our show. I think the two of us could do something well together to grow, both of our audience mutually. It's such a good thing to be able to send to somebody like that. That makes you look professional. That makes you look like you actually, put commitment into the projects you work on, and therefore you're worth collaborating with. So yeah, I think there's a range of it. I mean, there's a version of this I've created for getting interviewed too. So like common tactic to grow your own show is to go on other shows to get interviewed by other podcasters. And they'll want a one-pager of some sort, which says, like, what topics do you talk about? What do you cover? Probably your social media audiences as well, because that's obviously a fair draw to get on the show if you can help promote the episode. So a media kit that mentions what your podcast is and gives you a good bit of credibility around the podcast that you've grown will give you more more credibility to get on somebody else's show as well. It might be a little bit different. You might have a variation of it for that, but it's similar. It's very similar, I think. Yeah. Have you ever gone ahead and made one, Matthew, for any of your shows?
Yeah. For my tabletop show, I made one. So blagging free stuff wasn't actually the main intention here, although that was a nice kind of byproduct. But basically how it was working was I was making like pretty small purchases with websites that were selling maybe like terrain kits or that. So these weren't super expensive. Like, you're talking like 30, 40 quid sometimes with these orders. And I just basically mentioned to the person that I was speaking to when I was buying them, like reached out to them and said, I've got a podcast. And a lot of these companies, they don't even know what podcasts are. It's maybe just a guy in a workshop somewhere. So this was really helpful in just saying like, here's what it is, here's what it does, here's who it reaches. And I'm more than happy, obviously, to pay for this order. But if you wanted to do a sponsorship instead, we could just do a little trade there. So it was actually really good value for them. If you're talking 30, 40 quid, it's maybe 500-600 listeners that are really, really targeted to that company. So it was actually a really good deal for them. But it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't just to get free stuff. I actually quite enjoyed the process of like doing the sponsor reading that, because it was ultra relevant. Like we spoke about this a couple of episodes ago, like being able to talk about a product that you like and use anyway. There's a lot of fun in that, and it creates good content. So
it's kind of thing you speak about anyway.
Exactly. So it was just a good wee process to go through, and it was quite cool seeing that the media kit obviously did its job. It wasn't super heavy, full of details. I like to think it covered the basics, and even folks that were, like I say, totally non-technical, hadn't listened to shows before, we're able to skim this and say, oh, that's actually quite a good partnership.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I did one for our my mountain biking show as well at one point. So Mountain Bikes Apart, it was a website I ran just talking about mountain biking gear, kit, all that kind of stuff. And I did start similar kind of things, start to get sent some free stuff, like a pair of shorts here, a bike pump there. And I ended up putting one together to try and promote that a bit more, try and get a bit more in and get paid for some content slots, like some sponsored slots, that kind of stuff. And it worked quite nicely actually for a little while. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just another instance of it being quite worthwhile actually, because it's, I don't know, even if you're not monetizing directly, if you're out there thinking like, I don't want to go and sell, I not necessarily want to take money for sponsor slots, but I'd quite happily take like a free bit of gaming gear or a free bit of sports kit, because that's what I talk about. A media kit can even make you a bit more legit in that way to get more review stuff. And the review stuff often then turns into good content as well, doesn't it, Matthew? I mean, that's a big part of our company over the last 5-10 years is building relationships with gear manufacturers and software people and everything so that we can get trial stuff to try out and create content around.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, the listeners may be thinking to themselves, it sounds like a good idea worth exploring. I guess the next step is like, what do we actually include in this media kit? We've touched on this already, but like, what are some of the key things that we're looking to kind of highlight?
Yeah, we've got 6 things here, haven't we? Just to say as well, this is we published an article on this on the site, so we'll put that in the show notes. You can click and you can see, read through all the details on this. But yeah, I mean, there's 6 things. First of which is what. So yeah, what do you talk about? So just talking about your topic, like really kind of the elevator pitch of what you actually cover in the show and what angle you take on it. And then you've got who as well. That's the other side of that, the audience, like who you actually speak to. I mentioned that before, like the demographics. Get in depth about really who the average person is that listens to your show. They might have certain, age, gender, type, whatever. They might have some of that that's relevant to product people. Like people sponsoring a show want to know the type of people that listen. Or it might be more psychographics. It might just be, anyone who, for us, it's more just people who are really interested in sharing their message with the world, speaking to the world, like creating a podcast. Doesn't necessarily conform to any particular type of person. So yeah, that's the first 2. What we got next, Matthew?
Yeah, where as well is a good one. And I mean, this could cover literally where you are in the world, if that's relevant to your podcast. So say you did a tourism podcast in a certain area of the world that you were either based or you didn't necessarily have to be, but that would be worth mentioning. Or if you have demographic listener stats on your media host as well, you might say, I've got this like 40% of listeners in New York or something. That could be relevant too, depending on who you're speaking to. So yeah, geography could be relevant, not necessarily, but for some shows that could be worth pointing out as well. And then a big one, Colin, is the why, isn't it? The podcast's why.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, why is a big one, isn't it? Like, this matters more probably to you. Like, it's really important for you to know your why and know why you're creating the show and really what difference you're looking to make. But that can really inspire sponsors as well. If your why aligns with theirs, like, I don't know, take an example like Patagonia, a product that I use. And part of it is the attraction around their why. Like they want to, their mission is to like help people explore and reusable clothing. And so it's sustainability and exploration and all that kind of stuff. They've got a really strong why behind their company. So they might want to sponsor podcasts that are all about the same kind of things, sustainability, exploration, all that kind of stuff. So whys can be a really strong way to really align yourself with certain sponsors, with certain collaborators, with people that can really help you either monetize or grow your show. So it can be a really powerful one to include. What about the next one, Matthew? When? How does when come into it?
Yeah, this is all sorts of details. I mean, if you're a long-running podcast, then of course, boast about that. It's a great thing to be able to point out that you've been going for a long time. But even if not, just some key dates here. Maybe this is about, we plan to launch. You could have a media kit in place before you've even launched. That's possible. Or just things like release frequency as well. Maybe you do seasons and you're talking about the timings of those, or maybe you're just pointing out that you publish an episode every week or every fortnight or that. So it's just really letting people know either your history, if you have any, or what to expect going forward from your sort of release frequency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And the final one's how. I mean, how do you go about it? Like, it can be similar to that as well, like just functionality around how you get your show out there, where it appears. Are you on YouTube as well? Are you in the what directories are you in? All like just basically showing how you get your show out there to really showcase how you can help them appear in front of as many people as possible. Then there's a few kind of functional parts of it, isn't there? So fact sheet, I think, is really important, Matthew. Like, what do you include on a fact sheet in a media pack? We talked about stats earlier on.
Yeah, stats are a good one. Again, with the caveat that download numbers are tricky and complicated and they might take a bit of explaining, but there's no harm in having things like total downloads or average downloads per 30-day new episode, that old stat. Listener time, I guess, Con, if you can get a decent sample of that for maybe your Apple Podcast portal, that would be a good stat to put in there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you can show engagement, like if you can prove you're above average engagement, people listen to your show for longer, they listen to like 90% of the show nearly all the time, then that's really strong indicator to any sponsor. Because they're looking at, like we've said many times, the download numbers don't necessarily show how people like your show. That's just how many people are subscribed. Hopefully that's going up. That's a good indicator. So that can be a good thing to show as well. But it's the engagement that really shows how strongly listeners are actually connecting with your show, and therefore how likely they are really to buy the thing the sponsor is going to promote.
Yeah, like a fact sheet could even, if you run like a Patreon or that and it does pretty well, you could have info about that, because it maybe suggests to a potential sponsor, if this is your angle, there's an audience that are they like this content so much that they're prepared to pay for it, and that suggests that if we have a relevant product or service, they might be interested in buying that too.
Really good point. Yeah, totally. And yeah, your other platforms too, don't forget to put in, like if you have a blog that goes along with it, if you have a YouTube channel that goes alongside, like put in all of the complementary things. Like I think in our media pack for the podcast host, we've got blog stats, we've got YouTube channel, we've got social media, we've got our email. So email is actually a really key one, because email is really seen as a really powerful way to reach your audience. So if you do a package, you can package up, podcast sponsorship with email sponsorship, with maybe blog sponsorship as well. Showing all those numbers really gives any sponsor a really kind of rounded picture of where your audience is, how that audience engages with you, how they can work with you to get in front of that audience in a nice way, like a valuable way, so that they can offer some value to your audience. So yeah, put any numbers that are, that show that you've built something, really show that you've got some people that are engaging with the work that you're putting out. I think that's all valuable.
Anything else we could stick in there?
I mean, would you put artwork in, images? Like, I think sometimes that can be valuable. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're, you maybe got your media kit as like a PDF, but if you're thinking of it more as like your folder, say it's like a Google Drive or a Dropbox, you've got this folder, maybe you've got your main media kit in there, but maybe a folder with some like images and that as well. Say you're a podcaster who's trying to get some press coverage around your show. That makes it really easy for a journalist to take, a decent sized resolution of your podcast artwork, or maybe a photo of you, or maybe a photo of you doing the podcast or that. It's just making, like, if that's your aim here, get some press coverage, you're making it really easy then for journalists, aren't you, to cover a story.
Absolutely, yeah. Include a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, that goes back into the fact sheet too, doesn't it? Like, how long have you been running? What was the growth like? If somebody wants to write a story about you or wants to cover you in some way, then that stuff goes really far. And having that all in a folder, like some kind of sharing folder that you can share really easily. So like a Google Drive folder, a Dropbox folder, which includes the artwork, includes your PDFs, includes even a spreadsheet with the data. That's all really good stuff.
Yeah, if you've got that. If you've got that folder on like a short link, like podcraft.net/media kit or whatever, you could just keep everything in there up to date. You could replace your PDF, if you've got new stats to add or new information, new images, you could always just keep that sort of living if you like, can't you? So
yeah, that's something that can be a struggle, is keeping these things updated. If you go to If you go to too much trouble and actually create a really nicely designed PDF, then suddenly you have to go back to, the designer to update it. I think that's why. Where's our current Media Kit hosted, Matthew?
Well, it's either Notion or the site itself, like a page on the site. One of the two.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, simple as that.
Yeah.
Simple as that. It's just on Notion. Actually, the prime one I use is on Notion because you can create a public page, which is really easily edited, which has decent formatting. You can include images, all that kind of stuff, and you can just share this really simple link with people. But it's so easy to update, and it still looks pretty polished. Like, it's even easier to update really than a page on our website, because it used to be, like you say, a page on our website. But that took longer to update than just to go into Notion and update that. So yeah, I quite like the Notion approach. Just keep it simple like that. What about how to make it, Matthew? Like, where would you go and make it to make it easy?
Yeah, so you've touched on Notion already. Canva is the sort of no-brainer option for me. It's free to get started on Canva, and there's lots of templates in there. That's where I knocked my wee one together, and it took half an hour tops. So Canva's really good and straightforward to use.
Yeah, totally. That's the one way to make a PDF that's really nicely designed. Looks really professional and polished, but actually it's still easy to update because you can just go back into Canva and update the numbers there really simply. And a decent alternative is Adobe Express as well. Adobe Express has come up really fast in the last year or two to compete with Canva. It's basically exactly the same thing. Free design, free templates. But yeah, tons of Media Kit templates in there too. So, yeah. All right, Matthew, anything else on Media Kits, or does that pretty much cover it?
So Lindsay's added a couple of great examples in the article itself. We've got Girl in Space, a really popular podcast there. And what was the other one? Spirits. She mentioned those. Spirits is another show where we get to see their Media Kit. It's on their site. So I'm going to obviously link to the full post in the show notes. And I would encourage the listener to check it out.
Cool.
Get your Media Kit made.
Good stuff. All right. Okay, let's look at comments. Before we jump into that, though, I just mention, again, this content is always supported by the products we make, one of which is the Podcast Host Academy. I talked about the Podcraft Academy at the start. One feature of it I've been really enjoying doing, Matthew, actually leads on from remember the podcast health checks we used to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you always enjoy doing them? I think they were good fun to do, weren't they?
Totally, yeah. I did enjoy those, yeah.
Well, I've put together a kind of version of it called 4-Minute Feedback for our academy, which means that instead of sending a whole podcast, people can just send in a 4-minute clip, or even just send the whole thing and just give me a time code and say, listen to 4 minutes from here, and then ask a really specific question. And so what people do is they send it in, they say, here's 5 minutes 12, I've got a couple of interview questions here. Just give me some feedback on my interview question style. Could I get more specific? What do you think of it? And then I can write back with exact feedback on that real thing. And because it's only 4 minutes, because it's quite short, we can do this over and over again, like quite quickly. There's a really fast iteration cycle here rather than getting a whole podcast audited and then taking months to actually put it all into action. So people are finding it really easy to get in there just to ask some feedback, really specific stuff like how do I improve my outro? How do I improve my intro? Here's some ad reads. Here's my content. What about my audio quality? Things like that. So it's been really good fun doing that too, actually. Got a couple in already. So it's been really nice. So if you fancy that, if you fancy getting some 4-minute feedback from Matthew, myself, and the rest of the team, you can find it over at thepodcasthost.com/academy. That's thepodcasthost.com/academy. And it includes that plus all of the other stuff we do, from nearly one-to-one support to courses, resources to tools, all sorts of stuff that helps you grow your show. All right. Comments then, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, it's one kind of common criticism of podcasting, isn't it? That people struggle to get feedback, and creators obviously feel this as well. There is no central hub just to get people commenting or speaking about your episodes. So you have to do a bit of a tour of the internet, don't you, to see if there's anything out there. But so here are some sort of good options for anyone who wants to try and get more feedback around our show. So what's there at the top of the list, Colin?
We've got, I don't know, well, I've started to use this a lot more recently, actually, Reddit. So Reddit's been around for years, obviously. You a big Reddit user, Matthew?
No, not myself, no.
Yeah. I actually got kind of into it recently. I kind of forced myself to get to learn it because quite a lot of people I know were using it. Plus, it seems just a really useful tool for all sorts of reasons. So I started forcing myself to use it a bit, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I quite enjoy the fact that it is quite brief. Like, it encourages really short comments, but equally you can go quite long form if you want to. So it's pretty flexible that way. But one of the things I've seen people doing really nicely is set up communities for their podcast on there. So you can either pick out a niche community. So like forwards, the format's really weird, like r// But let's say it's just the true crime subreddit, and you can go in there and you can encourage your listeners to join in there as well, and then you can just have conversations with people around it. But equally you can get more specific and set up a subreddit specifically for your show and then send people to it. You could even create a short link for that subreddit. So you could say, if you want to discuss this episode, I'd love to know an answer to this question, go over to mypodcast.com/Reddit or something like that. And that would go to your subreddit specifically. So that could be a place where you nurture, conversation, you nurture people to go in and just talk to each other, get feedback, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, Reddit can work quite nicely for that. What else we got, Matthew?
Yeah, Facebook. So I did have a Facebook account many years ago, and we set up a group for our audio drama podcast.
Yeah.
And I've heard this happen a few times, examples of this happen a few times, but a group at the right place at the right time, it could outgrow the podcast in terms of like you end up with more people in there that actually know about or listen to the podcast, which is decent. So that happened with the audio drama group. Like, it got bigger than the show. But I just starting that group meant that like we could get like all our listeners that were on Facebook as well were in there, and it was always pretty good. We used to drop episodes on a Friday, and you got a lot of good engagement. You could speak back and forward to people as well. So not on Facebook these days, but I'm assured that groups still do exist in there. I don't know exactly the makeup of them now or how they work, but I'm sure it's not too dissimilar.
Nah, they still work quite nicely, yeah, for sure. Everyone's always talking about the death of Facebook for all sorts of reasons, but it's still the most used social media out there. So yeah, definitely worthwhile, because if you can create a community where people already exist, that's the key thing. Like, it's really hard to get people to start a new platform and go there on a regular basis, especially for something like this, for conversation and just, general. You want people to pop in fairly often, comment on things, talk about things, and nip away again. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle otherwise. But yeah, Facebook, lots of people there already, so really worthwhile. What about number 3? We've got Discord here. Matthew, you use Discord much?
Yeah, and it's one that I was always like hesitant to try out. But going on there and kind of getting used to it, I actually really like it because it's I don't know if it'll be this way forever, but you'll only see what you're in there to see. So it's a particular community around a podcast or a topic. That's all you see. Like, as far as I've come across, there are no ads, there are no like algorithms or anything like that. So it's almost just like a multi-person messenger app rather than like a typical social media platform, I guess.
I love Discord, and the alternative Slack's basically the same. They're twins almost for podcast communities for that exact reason. It's like there's no distractions. As long as you manage not to jump between communities, like that's probably the only distraction. It's always there. Lots of people live in those places as well. Like I mentioned, if you can have a place where people already log in on a daily basis for other reasons, whether it's their work, whether it's different hobbies, like adding a new community to that space can be so powerful. Like Slack is really my place for communities because I'm in there every day for work. Anyway, it's a place that I already live day to day, and therefore adding another community to it's actually pretty easy as long as it's good, valuable place to spend some time. So yeah, Discord and Slack are actually a really good option for me on something like this.
What about YouTube? Like, YouTube is famous for its comment section, so podcasters could lean into this, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could. like you alluded to earlier, is YouTube like the proper sewer of the internet in terms of conversation? And I don't know. Do you know? I do agree. There's lots of places on YouTube you just don't want to look at the comments. Our comments are actually pretty constructive on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is still pretty, like, it's not very big, 6,000 people, but the comments we get on it tend to be quite constructive questions or people saying thanks. So I don't know. I think it can be a really good place to do it as long as you nurture the right culture, the right type of audience potentially. I wonder if the people that struggle with YouTube comments are the ones that are putting out much more generic content, which then attracts just about anyone, and therefore that just ends up causing fights in the comments or anything. So I'm not sure. What about, so number 5, we've got your website. So I do like this one, Matthew. Like, we've never actually done this with our podcasts. So we've never drawn comments in our podcast, but we used to do comments on our blog, didn't we? And that always was actually quite a nice little community.
Yeah, I was just actually going in there just now to see if, and there are still comments. So I'm seeing one here. It says, Vatsagen Keto Gummies. Pretty. This has been a really wonderful post. Many thanks for providing these details. And another one on the keto gummies as well. This is for a different post as well. It says, "This was beautiful, admin. Thank you for your reflections." So these are really good comments. But I mean, obviously, we're not soliciting these. And if you are pointing your listeners to the comment section on your website, you could ask some good questions of them, get some good feedback. You could respond in there. I'm sure that Pod Page as well have a really good comments feature that you could turn on if you run your website on Pod Page too. So the benefit of doing this is, like, as much as you might get some junk comments, you're in control. Like, you can approve, you could turn them off or whatever. So it's as good a place as any, I should say, to get those comments.
It's similar trouble with YouTube, isn't it? That it's a bit more open. Like, people can just stumble across your website and then comment on it randomly with no investment. But if you have the ability to offer a login, accounts, that kind of stuff, that is possible on your website comments, then that can start to curate people that actually care and maybe come back again and again. So yeah, I think it's a good in principle. And I think we're going to talk about, well, actually, maybe we won't get into it here, but in the article, if you want to find out about Podcast 2.0, we've mentioned the Podcast 2.0 cross-channel comments idea, I guess, at the moment, in the past. And if that actually came to fruition at some point, your own website would be a great place for that to appear as one place. You know, it would appear at the bottom of your website, but it would also appear in the podcast apps. And it would only really be people that there would have to be some kind of login potentially to actually comment as well. So I think that could create some really nice comments potentially on your website as a result. Right. Spotify?
Yeah, have you had a look at the comments feature on Spotify before?
I have to admit, I have not at all yet. No, I just don't use Spotify for podcasting at all, but just purely for professional interest. I need to have a look soon. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Like, it's a great feature. It's probably one of the best options out here for podcast comments now. So if you log into your Spotify for Podcasters portal, you'll see you'll probably see comments on past episodes. You could approve them, you could reply to them. So again, it's a place you've got admin control over it, if you like, moderational control. But I could only see that getting more and more popular. Like, it is, you know, according to places like Buzzsprout and Libsyn, it is the top place now podcasts are being consumed. So I could only see that getting more busy with comments, and all power to them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just the downside of it being trapped in there compared to all the other apps, isn't it? Like, I don't know how the cross-platform comments potentially can be the only thing that solves that. But do we end up with, you know, a proportionate, a third of your audience commenting in Spotify, a third of them commenting in Apple Podcasts, a third in Pocket Casts? It's a bit troublesome, that, like, splitting out your audience, but. Yeah, there's no point not developing it. So yeah, good on them creating a good feature for it, at least getting some comments from some of your audience.
Yeah. Another really good one worth mentioning, Colin, is Podchaser, because you know that's obviously a really podcast listener specific platform for creators too. So they can comment and review, I should say, on your podcast as a whole, but listeners can also comment on individual episodes and leave little 5-star or 4-star reviews or 1-star reviews if they're that way inclined. But you can get a lot of feedback on there, especially if you encourage them to use that platform.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right. Well, that's the 7 from the article, isn't it? I had a couple of others to mention, actually. Was that any others you wanted to mention too?
I just wanted to ask you about LinkedIn. It's not a platform I've ever used, but I know you use it. So what's it like over there?
LinkedIn is actually quite good right now. It feels like it's quite positive. It feels like people are engaging with it really strongly. So yeah, absolutely. It's a place you could definitely share podcasts. Like you would share clips potentially, like some highlights plus links to your show, and you could have people comment below them on the entire episode potentially. You can create groups in LinkedIn still. I haven't done any LinkedIn groups for a while actually, so I'm not sure how that's working for people at the moment. Newsletters, so you can do a newsletter on LinkedIn as well, which you could potentially have your episode in and have the comments related to that too. So yeah, there's a few different ways you could curate comments around a specific episode in LinkedIn. So yeah, definitely something to think about for sure. Yep.
Do you think it ties in well with Media Kits? Because we're trying to inflate the perception of our own success on LinkedIn as well. So
is that all LinkedIn's for? Just to boost your
So I've heard.
Talk yourself up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's one of the less fighty social medias, less aggravating social medias just now. And it tends to be, I mean, there's definitely a particular audience. Like people tend to be at work. It's a bit more professional. It's a bit more worky based. So it's only probably for certain audiences. Like if you're doing an audio drama, potentially not the best place for it, something like that. But yeah, good otherwise. But the other ones I wanted to mention, actually, we've just set up, we've mentioned it on a few episodes, as a circle group for our podcast. So there's the downside of this in that you're trying to get people to log into a new place. So if you're out there thinking, I'd like to join the Podcraft listener community, but I'm not sure about joining a whole nother platform, I understand that. But it does give you so much flexibility, so much control over how you can run that community as well. Like Circle is such a nice platform to have a community in, to participate in. You know, it has so many different ways to communicate with people, to offer resources, value, all that kind of stuff. So we've been running a community in Circle. And I'm finding it really good, actually. Yeah. Have you played around in there much yet, Matthew? Do you like Circle as a platform?
No, I've not used it a massive amount. Like I have been in there, but I'm not entirely familiar. But it looks super straightforward.
Yeah, it is. It's just so simple. It's so easy to use, and it's so kind of pleasant. The UX is just really nice, like the user experience and all that. So yeah, really good. And the other one worth mentioning too, I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode, is Ripple. Ripple.fm by a friend of the show, Brian Castle. He developed that as potentially a private podcasting platform, but more for community building than monetization. And you can start up your own little space in there and have your own community space where chat, feedback, conversation is all really heavily promoted. So it's looking really good. It's quite simple at the moment. He's just kind of put together almost a first MVP, but it works perfectly well, works really nicely. And he's got some really good communities already running in there. So that's one worth checking out too. And final one, Matthew, was live events. We haven't even mentioned live events. Does that count?
Standing up on a stage and asking people to put their hand up after you've talked to them for 40 minutes. Is that what you had in mind?
Something like that. I mean, it could be a live broadcast, but even just meetups. Like, I think people, what is the point in the comments? It's to get feedback. It's to grow a community of your listeners. It's to interact with them, to give them a sense of like connection with your show, but also to give you, feedback on what to improve or what content to create in future, all that kind of stuff. Live events are just so good for that. Like, just run a meetup once a month. Centered around your podcast, or run the meetup centered around more maybe the topic you cover, and your podcast becomes like a part of that over time. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that's such a good place to achieve so many of the same aims that the comments on podcasts are meant to achieve. But actually, you go so much deeper because you maybe get 10 people in a room and you get to talk to them direct.
And I guess this applies to online events too, doesn't it? Like if you've got a really international audience, like you could do an online thing and have people together too. So
absolutely, yeah, totally. Run a webinar, run a little. I don't know, what do you do it in these days? It used to be like Blab or something like that, like a live broadcast.
Periscope, Meerkat.
Periscope, yeah, exactly, something like that. But yeah, if you run like even a YouTube Live or something like that, a Facebook Live, a LinkedIn Live, they all offer these tools now. And if you can get people live on there, maybe that's the best way to get comments because you can interact with them at the time and go deeper. And it encourages thoughtful comments, it encourages positive comments as opposed to just, this was crap.
Even though it was. I've one more to throw into the mix just before we get wrapped up. And that's voice feedback, like SpeakPipe or Telby.
Good one.
I think having a voice feedback option on your site is a good idea. And we've discussed this on the show before. It's great to get voice feedback that you could play in the show. Like getting an email or a comment that you could read out is really good. But having the listener like basically read or say it themselves, that takes it to another level, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like that a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, a few different ways to do it as well. So yeah, get involved, get some more feedback onto your shows. Really engages people. Right, well, that do it for us, Matthew.
Yeah, comment on the show if you liked it. If you didn't like it, don't bother.
Genuinely, go into the community that we've set up and we'd love to see comments. So if you go over to thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community, that's podcraft, the name of the show, community, thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community, you'll pop right in there. You just have to join our circle space and you'll get, with that link, you'll get invited straight into the Podcraft listener space specifically, but you can take part in the rest of the IndiePod community too if you like. Loads of great podcasters in there having great conversations, but we'd specifically love to hear from you about how you do comments on your show, or how you'd like to do comments on your show. Which one of these resonates with you, and which one might you try? All right, Matthew, thank you for another good show, good chat.
Always my pleasure, Colin.
Thank you out there for listening. Always good to hear from you as well. If we can get you in the community, that'll be excellent. All right. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next time. See you then.